What if I told you that in medieval Europe a lump of sugar could cost more than gold? That the sweetest treat in a nobleman's pantry might have been worth more than a soldier's yearly wage? Sounds unbelievable, right? But for thousands of people living in castles and hovels alike, junk food was the ultimate treasure, and by the end of this video, you'll never look at a donut or candied fruit the same way again. We often picture medieval treasures as chests overflowing with coins, goblets dripping with rubies, or legendary swords forged for kings. But real treasure? It wasn't always metal. Sometimes it was edible. In a time of brutal winters, famines, and sieges, food wasn't just nourishment, it was survival, power, and pride. What we now call junk food, sweet, fatty, calorie-dense treats, was once the most sought-after item in a medieval household. From crystallized fruits to deep-fried dough, these indulgences didn't just fill bellies, they filled vaults. Welcome to a forgotten history where survival, luxury, and desire collided at the dinner table. When we think of medieval treasure, one image comes to mind: gold, gleaming coins stashed in chests, ornate goblets studded with gems, and swords passed down through royal bloodlines. History books, movies, and museums have long fed us this vision. But what if everything we believed about treasure was wrong? Because for the average person in the Middle Ages, or even the average noble, treasure didn't always shine. Let's put this into perspective. In a world without refrigeration, supermarkets, or global supply chains, food wasn't guaranteed. Harvests failed, wars cut off trade routes, winters were brutal, famines were frequent, entire villages could vanish under the weight of a single failed crop. In times like that, a loaf of bread could be the difference between life and death. Now imagine what something indulgent, a sweet, fried, spiced pastry, meant. The real challenge wasn't just acquiring gold, it was staying alive. And survival depended on calories, on preserved goods, on energy-rich foods. Ironically, the same foods modern nutrition tells us to avoid, fatty meats, sugars, fried doughs, alcohol, were once considered salvation. These items didn't just keep you alive longer, they offered a taste of comfort, celebration, and even luxury in a world plagued by hardship. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. In medieval courts and noble houses, food became more than fuel. It became power. A nobleman might not show off with gold coins. Instead, he'd host a sugar banquet, display candied fruits, or offer guests honeyed ale. These weren't just snacks, they were status symbols. We marvel at medieval crowns but ignore the pantry locks. We study royal armor but not the imported saffron tucked away like spice-laced treasure. This is the blind spot. This is the buried truth. Because the real medieval treasures were often hidden not beneath castles, but in cellars, kitchens, and secret stashes. We've simply failed to see them for what they were: edible gold. So, what exactly were these treasured foods that held more power than gold in the medieval world? If you're imagining peasants hoarding candy bars, you're not far off. Just swap out the wrappers for beeswax cloth and barrels of honey. Let's start with candied fruits, one of the most prized indulgences of the time. To candy a fruit meant to slowly boil it in sugar or honey until it was preserved, glossy, and shelf-stable. This wasn't just a treat, it was a science, and it required two rare ingredients: patience and imported sugar. Figs, plums, and even orange peels were transformed into sweet delicacies. For nobles, offering candied ginger or sugared violets was like handing your guest a diamond-encrusted dessert. Then there were the deep-fried confections, a medieval precursor to donuts and fritters. Recipes from the 14th century describe dough balls fried in animal fat, then dipped in honey or sprinkled with spiced sugar. Rich in calories and challenging to make without access to high-quality flour and oil, these were rare, celebratory foods, served during feasts, festivals, or religious holidays. Spiced cakes were another hidden luxury. While flour and eggs might have been accessible, the spices like cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and saffron were not. These ingredients had to travel from the Middle East or even as far as India, crossing deserts, seas, and war-torn lands. A pinch of saffron could cost more than a day's wages. A spiced honey cake was a flex and a financial investment. One of the most extravagant items? Sugar sculptures. Yes, nobles hired artisans to mold entire scenes, castles, mythical beasts, even human figures, out of hardened sugar. These creations graced banquet tables not for eating but for admiration. To even display one was to announce your rank. Even alcoholic drinks had their own treasure status. Mead, made from fermented honey, and spiced ale were not casual beverages. They were signs of a host's wealth and generosity, used to mark special moments or seal alliances. So while modern junk food lines supermarket shelves, its medieval counterparts were locked behind iron doors, guarded like heirlooms. Each sweet bite wasn't just a snack, it was a symbol of wealth, status, and social rank. In 2012, a team of archaeologists excavating the remnants of a crumbled manor house in Denmark stumbled upon something that baffled even the experts. Hidden beneath the kitchen floor, sealed off for centuries, was what looked like a treasure stash. But it wasn't filled with coins or jewels. There were no swords, crowns, or religious relics. Instead, there were jars of crystallized fruit, traces of almond pastries, and even fragments of exotic spices like saffron and cinnamon. At first glance, it seemed anticlimactic, but historians knew better. What they had uncovered was a culinary vault, a private hoard of preserved luxury food items meant to last through siege, famine, or disaster. These weren't just leftovers, they were investments. Each jar, each preserved bite, told a story of trade, scarcity, and power. A nearby record, preserved in a monastery archive, revealed the context. During a local peasant uprising, the noble family had locked their finest possessions in the most unexpected place. The pantry, not the vault, not the chapel. They chose to preserve their edible wealth, food that, in that time and place, was as precious as life itself. And this wasn't a one-off case. A ledger from 1324 in England records that 1 pound of sugar cost more than 1 pound of silver. Just imagine paying a small fortune for something that would melt in your mouth in minutes. Another nobleman, according to household roles, spent more on a saffron cake for his daughter's wedding than on repairing his manor's roof. This is the moment of realization, the climax of our story. It wasn't always gold that made men powerful or revered in the medieval era, it was what they could serve on their table. Because in a time of desperation, disease, and decay, sweetness was salvation, and the ability to offer it? That was the real mark of medieval royalty. So, what really mattered in the Middle Ages? Not always gold, not always land. Sometimes it was a fried fritter. Sometimes it was a lump of sugar. Sometimes it was a honey cake wrapped in cloth, passed down through winters and war. We've come a long way. Today we throw away food. We shame junk food. But back then, these items meant life, honor, and hope. Food was power. Food was diplomacy. Food was treasure. And maybe, just maybe, we should rethink what we call junk before history does it for us again. If this video changed the way you think about medieval history or the candy bar in your hand, let us know in the comments. What's one modern food you think future historians might call a treasure? And don't forget to check out our next video.